afternoon. My name is Sarah Breifogel. I'm CGS's Manager of Web and Electronic Communications. While we wait for people to join today's webinar, I just want to take you through a couple of quick logistics. If you are familiar with CGS webinars, these are probably not new to you. The first request that I have is that if you have any questions for our panelists today, please use the Q&A feature to submit them to our panelists. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. We've got quite a large webinar today, so we have disabled the chat. So please do use that Q&A feature to ask your questions. We'd love to hear them. And as usual, the recording and the presentation slides will be emailed to registrants and will be posted on the CGS website and YouTube channel following the live event. So please feel free to share with your colleagues if they can't make this. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to CGS's President, Suzanne Ortega, to introduce today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and welcome, colleagues. My name is Suzanne Ortega, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the president of the Council of Graduate Schools. Since I know many of you are faculty members joining us from CGS member institutions, you may not really be familiar with CGS as an organization, so I just thought I'd share a few words of context. For the past 60 years, CGS has served as the primary organization that works to advance graduate education and research. In collaboration with our approximately 460 member universities, CGS supports its mission and advocacy in the policy arena, innovative research, and the development and sharing of best practices in graduate education. Our primary points of contact at CGS member universities are graduate deans, and perhaps many of you heard about the webinar and were invited to attend by the graduate dean at your campus. Today, we are really pleased to be presenting the second of two webinars that are designed to help graduate institutions and graduate faculty ensure they are meeting NSF's new requirements for graduate student mentoring. But of course, compliance is not the goal. These requirements are intended to promote the success of graduate students and the process of creating strong and healthy research environments. Those strong and healthy research environments are absolutely essential to the quality of our ultimate research outcomes. So today you're going to be hearing from faculty members who are widely respected, both as fundamental researchers and as mentors in their respective fields. But we'll start today's webinar with some background from the National Science Foundation. So at this point, I am pleased to hand the presentation over to Jacqueline Huntoon, who is the Director of the Division of Graduate Education at NSF. Jackie.
Thank you. Thanks, Suzanne. So I want to start out by thanking everyone for joining us here today and letting you know that on behalf of the National Science Foundation and the Directorate for STEM Education and the Division of Graduate Education, I am very happy to see you here participating. I also want to thank the Council of Graduate Schools for organizing this webinar. Today's event, and the one that was designed primarily for academic administrators that was held on April 22nd, 2024, are two events that are really helping NSF disseminate information about the agency's new requirements related to graduate student mentoring. And I imagine that everyone here today is familiar with the outstanding work that CGS has been doing for decades to improve graduate education. CGS has enabled collaboration and communication among graduate deans over the years, helping the graduate education community identify common challenges faced by students and develop strategies to mitigate those challenges. Their work has highlighted the importance of mentoring in graduate education. By providing effective mentoring, faculty members and others within and outside of institutions of higher education can help to ensure that graduate students have the best possible chances for success. Several CGS publications have provided guidance related to mentoring. A few examples include On the Right Track, a manual for research mentors, Policies and Practices to Promote Student Success, Research Student and Supervisor, and Supporting Graduate Student Mental Health and Well-Being. And in addition to these documents and other resources that are available elsewhere, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Mathematics published a consensus report in 2018 entitled Graduate STEM Education for the 21st Century. NSF's Division of Graduate Education commissioned this report to examine the state of graduate education in the U.S. and consider how the graduate education system might best respond to ongoing developments in research, teaching, and the evolving interests of students and society. The final chapter of that report, entitled A Call for Systemic Change, outlined a vision for an ideal graduate education in STEM. According to that vision, in an ideal graduate education environment, institutions would help students identify advisors and mentors who can best support their academic and career development. The ideal environment would also provide faculty with training, resources, and time, both to improve their own skills as mentors and to provide for quality mentoring and advising to the graduate students they supervise directly, as well as the other students in their department or from across the institution that they interact with. Subsequently, in 2019, the National Academies published another report entitled The Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM. And I think one of the most important findings from that report was that effective mentorship is associated with positive mentee outcomes. Saying that a different way, that means that the investments mentors make in working with their mentees pays off. And the payoff actually benefits the students who are mentored, as well as their mentors and their fields of study through increased publications and more research output, as well as their academic institutions who experience increased retention and completion rates. So the US Congress has apparently been paying attention to these reports and all of the other information that they've been provided, because they included some new requirements related to graduate student mentoring in the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. These requirements are now included in NSF 24-1, which is the most recent version of NSF's Proposal and Awards Policies and Procedures Guide, also known as the PAPG. And the PAPG governs how proposals and awards are managed by NSF. So these new requirements in the PAPG are specifically that all proposals to NSF that include support for graduate students must include a mentoring plan for those graduate students, and all annual and final reports to NSF for projects that provide substantial support to graduate students must certify that the students had an individual development plan, also known as an IDP. Dr. Daniel Deneke, who is also from NSF's Division of Graduate Education, will speak more about these new requirements in a few minutes. And I just want to mention that these requirements are important for NSF because the agency has a mandate to contribute to the continual enhancement of the national STEM enterprise. This, of course, means making financial investments in the development of future STEM talent. These PAPG new requirements are also intended to emphasize how mentoring enhances the agency's financial investments by contributing to a nurturing learning environment that helps students achieve their goals. I think we all recognize that future STEM talent is a valuable national resource that should not be wasted. And students who are now in graduate school will ultimately have varied career paths that may include jobs in academia, business, and government. But whatever their path, they're going to be asked to come up with innovative solutions to society's increasingly complex challenges. Because of the skills they are building in graduate school, they are likely to become the nation's future leaders. And these are the individuals who will contribute to improve social conditions, sustainability, scientific innovation, economic prosperity, and national security. The new mentoring requirements are intended to help fully realize the potential benefits of the nation's graduate STEM talent. So in closing, I want to thank everyone again for being here today. The entire graduate education community, including CGS and other organizations, are to be commended for their leadership on issues related to improving graduate education. Without their efforts, the mentoring plan and IDP requirements now being implemented by NSF would never have been possible. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Daniel Deneke, and he'll tell us some more about these new requirements.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. So good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I want to echo Jackie's thanks to the Council of Graduate Schools for hosting this discussion to raise awareness in the graduate community about new NSF requirements and expectations for mentoring of graduate students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So your interest in better understanding these new requirements and your commitment to quality mentoring is important for the next generation of scientists and engineers. CGS invited NSF to frame today's webinar by providing an overview of the new NSF requirements for graduate student mentoring plans and individual development plans, specifically why these are being implemented, why they are important, and to outline expectations for principal investigators. Dr. Huntun has already addressed the rationale for requirements and their importance, so now I will just briefly provide some more detail around what these requirements are, specifically how they will be implemented, and NSF's expectations of PIs. These requirements are published in the new NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, PAPG, what we call the PAPG. The publication number, as Jackie mentioned, is NSF 24-1, and they are effective for all proposals submitted to NSF after May 20th, 2024. First, I'll discuss the mentoring plan requirement. This is virtually unchanged from the previous requirement for mentoring plans for postdoctoral researchers supported on NSF projects. NSF now, as authorized by the America Competes Act of 2022, previous slide, please, expands this requirement to include all graduate students supported on NSF projects. Yes, next slide. So some important points, and again, this is effective for proposals submitted on or after May 20th, 2024 to NSF. First, these plans are to be submitted as part of the supplementary documentation section for proposals submitted in research.gov. The plans are limited to 1 page. Plans must address postdocs or graduate students on the project. The language says or, but really this is an and/or. Separate plans for each group are not required, but the plan may specify differences in the way mentoring will be provided for postdocs and for graduate students. NSF does not prescribe what these plans must include and recognizes the unique relationships between a mentor and mentee and the different forms graduate mentoring may take. Examples provided, next slide or previous slide. Examples provided include career counseling, training and proposal preparation, publications and presentations, guidance on teaching and mentoring skills, skills working in teams, diverse in backgrounds and discipline, and responsible professional practice. It's important to note that these mentoring activities will be evaluated under the broader impacts criterion. It's also worth noting that the PAPG stipulates that if a PI transfers from one institution or organization to another, this requirement follows the PI to the new institution. Next slide. So that is the new mentoring requirement, which again is virtually identical to the prior requirement for postdoctoral researchers, except that this now applies to graduate students as well. The plan will be submitted along with submitted proposals, and to reiterate, will be evaluated as part of the broader impact criteria in the review of merit review of NSF proposals. Now I want to note the second big new requirement, which is for individual development plans for postdoctoral scholars or graduate students. This requirement is entirely new and also authorized through the CHIPS and Science Act, and it is also effective for proposals submitted on or after May 20th, 2024. First thing that I want to do is pull out the key information here, and that's the phrase substantial NSF support. The second is that these plans must be updated annually. And the third is as certified by the PI in their annual and final project reports. So the slide should be titled Implementation Details. And here, what does substantial support mean and what will be expected of PIs? You're probably already familiar with the person month calculations for NSF budget calculations for people on 9-month and 12-month appointments. So a basic rule of thumb for graduate research assistants is here. And we're happy to share the assumptions that inform this rule of thumb with you offline. But basically, substantial support for graduate assistants will translate into approximately half a semester at full support associated with 20 hours per week commitment, and approximately 1 semester at half support associated with 10 hours a week work commitment. So finally, for the slide should be titled Support Notes. Here's a definition of support. And normally this would be distinct from educational time. So support may be in the form of stipend or tuition as governed by the Uniform Guidance Regulation here and institutional policies. And then finally, graduate student support is intended to provide support for students pursuing a degree. Time commitment required for educational pursuits such as courses, research project, et cetera, are normally in addition to the time committed to the institution in return for support provided. So thank you. Those are my comments, and I anticipate we'll be happy to take some questions.
Many thanks to both Jackie and to Daniel. My name is Carrie Moorhead. I am the Dean in Residence at the Council of Graduate Schools and Dean Emerita from the University of New Hampshire. And I will be looking at the Q&A. So for those of you who would have some burning questions, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A section. There were some questions about the references and resources that Jackie mentioned in her opening remarks. We will speak a little bit more about resources in the end, but yes, we will go back and ensure that the resource page that we have available will include links to reports that have been mentioned during Jackie's remarks. And so I'm going down here. So I guess this one would be for Daniel. Is the IDP part of the proposal?
Is the IDP part of the proposal? Submitted as actually, so the mentoring plan will be submitted as a supplemental document. The IDPs are not part of the proposal, but they must be certified to exist as part of the annual reporting requirements for institutions. So when they report in their first annual report, second annual report, they will certify that these individual development plans are in place for students and have been updated annually.
Thank you for that, Daniel. We're going to have Corey speaking a lot about IDP and the broader principles around IDP. There are a number of questions in here that relate to some form of a template, standardization, that general question. Could you speak to that in the broad sense, Daniel? And then Corey will get into more about IDP.
Yeah, in the broadest sense, there is not a standard template, a standard format required for the IDP. There are some excellent models out there, and I'm sure you'll hear about some of those. There's also some interesting research about promising practices in the use of IDPs in mentoring, and so we hope that the resources developed will provide you with access to that knowledge as well.
Thank you for that. We have a question here with regard to the GRFP. Could you clarify how the mentoring plan for the institution's GRFP grant differ from individual PI's plans? Also, do individual fellows certify an IDP for themselves, or does their advisor do that? This question came up in the first session as well with regard to the difference between those GRFPs in particular and the PI's requirement.
I'm going to ask my colleague Jackie to address as much of that as she.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Jackie.
GRFP operates differently than most of the other programs at NSF because individual students apply for the awards, but once the awards are made, the funds are dispersed through an institution. So the awards are made to institutions, and then the institutions disperse the funds to the fellows. So there are several documents that the institutional awardees must prepare on an annual basis or once every 3 years as part of the award process. The mentoring plan will actually be included as part of the authorized organizational representatives document that's submitted to NSF. And people who are going through the award process right now are being counseled on how to prepare these documents by the GRFP staff. In terms of the IDPs, those will again be documented or certified that IDPs were used as part of the normal paperwork that's submitted by the institutional awardees. And the GRFP awards are all governed by an administrative guide for the program. And there will be more information and addendum coming out to the administrative guide in the near future that will provide institutional awardees with more information about both the mentoring plans and the IDPs.
Thank you for that, Jackie. This question is with regards to perhaps the structure of how things might be constructed within an institution. Are the requirements on mentoring training perhaps adjacent to or integral to RCR training? Is there anything you'd like to share on that?
The only thing I would say to that, there may be institutional differences in terms of how and where institutions implement these requirements. So NSF will just recognize that there will be different institutional models for implementing these requirements. However, from our perspective, we're kind of agnostic as long as these plans are in place. And updated annually. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. And I think the answer may be similar. Several questions, they are coming in like popcorn here, so I'm trying to keep up. But as new questions come in, the other ones pop further up. So I will again paraphrase here. And I think several people are asking around the role or the level to which NSF plans to assess and appraise individual efforts in this regard. Could you speak to that again at a broad level, please?
So at the broadest level, I think as we'd mentioned, the mentoring plans themselves, as with the postdoctoral mentoring plans, will be assessed in the review process under the broader impacts criteria. With respect to the individual mentoring plans, it is comparable to requirements for responsible conduct of research training, for example, that they simply be in place and certified. However, these could be the subject of review on a site visit, for example, or in some kind of institutional audit. But at this point, there is not a plan to individually review the individual development plans for. I can't speak to the GRFP, but outside of the GRFP, that's the case.
Thank you.
Jackie,
again,
is there anything?
Oh yeah, Jackie, if there's anything you'd like to add.
No, I think that's fine.
Thank you. Paraphrasing again, several questions. If there are institutions that we know of that have good models in place regarding either the RCR type training or the mentoring approaches within. So in this resource page that CGS will host, we are putting up institutions links to areas where we feel that these are really good examples. And I would welcome some. That's a standing invite. I will mention that again at the end. If you happen to feel that you have a great example on your campus, please feel free to share that with me. And I will put my details obviously in the chat as well. So yes, we have three faculty on today that are going to give examples of how things work with them. We have the resources are segmented out in different categories, if you will, one for mentors, one for mentees, and one more on the administrative side of things. And we're going to try to ensure that these operate in a way that can help people that are PIs, postdocs, graduate deans, and their office staff to provide examples that we feel would be helpful. Going back to what President Ortega said, overall, compliance is not the goal. While we want people to be in compliance, the goal is better mentorship, stronger, healthier research labs. The research outcomes will be better and the student outcomes will be better. And we're all working together to try to enhance all of our understanding and appreciation for the ways in which that can take place. Here's a question with regard to, postdocs have had these requirements already. Postdoc and graduate student mentoring is quite different. What drove the decision to require them both to fit into the same space as the previously required postdoc plan?
This is certainly above my pay grade. And Jackie, I'm not sure if you know the history of that as well, but I have not an answer for that question.
Yeah, so part of it is trying to reduce the paperwork burden for PIs. And although postdocs are, of course, very different than graduate students, there are some topics that a mentoring plan for both might cover. And then there are some things that are different. And so the thought was that there might be areas where a PI might be able to say, for all graduate students and all postdocs, we will talk about things like career development, responsible conduct of research, financial management, mental health resources, et cetera, et cetera. And then there might be some differences for the postdocs, some additions for the postdocs, or some additions for the graduate students. But there might be some areas of overlap so that people would not have to write basically the same thing twice for two different groups.
And these are one-page plans, so it's very, very possible that your plans will go beyond the one page submitted to the NSF. Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that, Daniel, this question of whether or not the one page is the maximum or it's required to have one page, but an additional space might be allowable?
It's the requirement, again, to the paperwork issue is no more than one page. So you're going to want to distill your plan into one page submitted to officially meet this requirement. But yeah, as we mentioned, your plans may well exceed the content of the one page in terms of what you plan to do, how you plan to articulate differences in mentoring for graduate students vis-a-vis postdocs, and but the NSF requirement is no more than one page in combining them both. Yes.
Excellent. Appreciate that very much. And going back, Jackie, you may really have answered this already, but in particular, somebody said the university where they are operating has an interdisciplinary graduate program that already involves training in team science and DEI and probably multiple other areas as well. This is described, this is the quote, "This is described in my facilities/equipment and other resources document. Is it appropriate to reference this program in my mentoring plan as well?"
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think that's great that it's in the facilities document because that really is important for the research that's going on. Perhaps for the mentoring plan requirement and that one-page mentoring plan, it might be appropriate to speak to how these sorts of resources will be customized to meet the needs of individual graduate students. And it sounds like most of that is related specifically to the research, but mentoring might be more broad than that. So really trying to think about how to make sure the student is staying on track in their graduate program, meeting the milestones, planning, again, their finances. A lot of times financial stress causes a lot of undue burden and time for students. And then thinking about career goals as well as something else that might be in the mentoring plan.
Excellent. Thank you for that. This next question just jumped on me. So I'm going to, oh, here it is. Yeah. I think this has to do with who's responsible and how will the institution manage this. And you have already spoken to the fact that we know that institutions are going to be different in how they approach these kinds of things. So I think the answer is going to be with quite a bit of flexibility from NSF, as long as you're getting the job done within your structure. That's more what you're interested in. So certainly don't want to preempt what you're going to say, but I'm hoping that this is not overlap. Can graduate programs develop comprehensive professional development programs that any student in a program can access? And I would go further and say it's likely that graduate schools themselves are going to create centralized programs, not even at the program level, but at the college or at the graduate school level, perhaps in terms of providing simplifying the administrative burden, if you will. Anyway, that any grad student in the program can access, and then investigators in the program can use those programs to then support these efforts in that, so that each individual PI is not standing up these kinds of programs themselves. Could you speak to that?
So I'll speak to the spirit of the individual development. I'm sure you'll hear this from some of the speakers today. The purpose and the spirit of the individual development plan is it's a student-centered document that allows the student to articulate their own goals, their own aspirations, and track their own professional development through the course of graduate study, and have these kinds of conversations with their advisors, perhaps with mentors who are not only their advisors, with the PI on an NSF grant. And so if I'm interpreting the question correctly, simply having a generic boilerplate that every student has and submitting that as their quote unquote individual development plan would defeat the purpose of the individualized development plan. Now, you very well may have a template that informs individualization. So every PI, every advisor doesn't have to reinvent the structure. And so while we don't prescribe the exact content or the exact structure, there are excellent examples here about what structures might facilitate that individualization that the students and in dialogue with their advisors and mentors would engage in.
Thank you for the excellent clarification. In the last couple of minutes, I would love to turn the floor back over to both of you for some final remarks. And Daniel, you already hit one. I think that's exceptionally important, which is their individuality is really key in this. And mentoring matters because it's about the individual relationships and figuring out what's in the best needs of individual students and their futures to support their work and the work most broadly. Any other
I just wanted to add for the mentoring plan component as well. So at a lot of institutions, I think, Kiri, you were bringing this up, that the central administration, the graduate school, the graduate dean may already have a lot of resources available and may be able to serve as a great guide for the campus in terms of what can be done centrally by student affairs, by the graduate school, what should be done at a college level, for example, what should be done at a departmental level, and then what the expectations are for individual advisors of graduate students. So it can be a shared activity, and a mentoring plan could touch on all of those different resources and include also things like peer mentoring within the department, which could be very helpful to students. And I think, what Daniel was touching on is really important, that the individual development plans are an individual activity that's really focused on the student. And the most important part in developing those individual development plans is the conversations that students have with their advisors and their other mentors, so that there's a shared understanding of what the student's goals in life are, and a commitment to help the student achieve those goals.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. It's been a real honor and a privilege to work with you and on behalf of CGS in this really important project. At this point in the program, it is a great honor for me to turn over to some of our faculty colleagues and PIs who have been successful in their efforts and who are seen as really good exemplars in their work with their students and their role in terms of mentorship. We have 3 faculty members. Ricardo Cortez is a professor of mathematics from Tulane University. Ricardo will be followed by Adam Metzger, who is a professor of chemistry and macromolecular science and engineering at the University of Michigan, and Ruth Varner, professor of biochemistry at the University of New Hampshire. Again, I'm Carrie Moorhead, CGS Dean in Residence and Dean Emerita from the University of New Hampshire. Ricardo, I will turn it over to you to begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm really excited to be here in this presentation because mentoring has been very important to me, both as a mentor and also as the recipient of great mentoring throughout my career. And so I'm glad to be part of this. To begin with, I want to tell you a little bit about myself so that you know where I'm coming from. I am an applied mathematician, as it was said. That means that I work collaboratively with collaborators from different disciplines, mostly from other sciences, but also from education and engineering, epidemiology, things like that. And for me, issues of underrepresentation in STEM are very important. And so mentoring students and postdocs is really a critical component of this work. Next slide, please. So to begin with, I had to learn really what the difference is between mentoring and advising. And some of this conversation we were just having now has to do with this. Advising is maybe something that you can suggest to different groups of people, their recommendations. For example, in academia, we often advise students in the program, and we give basically similar recommendations for students that have that are in the same program. On the other hand, this doesn't require me to really know deeply what the students' objectives are, as long as the students in the program. Next slide. In mentoring, on the other hand, mentoring requires me to know the student or the postdoc and understand their priorities and goals, what their objectives are. And then together we design a set of activities that will make it possible for them to achieve their goals. This is how I understand mentoring and how I operate. So in my case, because of applied mathematics, the career objectives of the postdoc, for example, could be an academic position, but with a teaching focused or with a research focused. Or in some cases, the research career in industry is what they want, or in a national laboratory, and other objectives. So all of these things have to be taken into account when I develop together with them the development plan. So in the early stages, if I don't know the person well, then there's lots of conversations. I like to set expectations, and they can tell me their expectations. I explain my mentoring style, which is very hands-on. I like to chat with them a lot and visit them. There's a lot of flexibility that is necessary at this point because we have to learn what each other's habits and needs are. For example, I've had postdocs that have religious obligations during during office hours, let's say, and so we have to accommodate that. And here together, I like to work with them on an individual development plan together, and this states the short-term goals and the long-term goals that they have, and we make the plan as detailed as possible. We go as far as writing the schedule, travel plans, and expected duties, and how fast the progress needs to be made, and things like that, so that we all are aware of what we expect from each other. for my case, the cross-disciplinary collaborations really require an initial time investment where it seems like we're not making a lot of progress, but it's because we're learning the discipline-specific cultures and languages and things like that. So I want to make sure that they're aware of that. Past the early stages, then we discuss things that have been talked about already, career opportunities. For example, if a postdoc wants to be in academia, it's important for them to have the experience of mentoring undergraduates, for example, or teaching a course. And so we make sure that they have the opportunity to do that. And here are some other examples of things that we discuss with that. And then throughout the, next slide, please. Throughout the appointment, I emphasize the synergy of these activities. So this is my last slide. And the point I wanted to make is that in academia, we often separate our job as doing research, teaching, and service. But really, these are all combined into towards the same goals, in my opinion. So, for example, I have a couple of examples here where for a postdoc supervising undergraduate research project, if that leads to a publication, then it becomes part of the research output. And so these things are not separate from each other. They're together and they combine in a way of producing the type of research that they need for the next step in their career. I will stop there.
Thank you. So I'm Adam Matzker, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan. And I was in a position of leading the graduate school's committee on mentoring for the whole university for a number of years. And I learned a lot by talking, across disciplines. And to say that, mentoring in the sciences and humanities is like apples and oranges really understates the differences greatly. And so sort of the field-specific differences are really important. But we did find commonly when we would talk to faculty and students, and together I talked to, probably 1,000 over the years, is a common issue for students was this issue of having shared, understanding the expectations. And so that's why our mentoring plan that we have at the University of Michigan is called Creating Shared Expectations. And at its fundamental level, beyond getting through things like, how do we communicate, what are, sort of the most basic expectations, the big questions center around what is the role of the student in the group. So what are their expectations for them as a group member? What are the PI's expectation for those students? And then what is their role on projects? So this is an opportunity to define early on, as early as possible, who first authors will be on a project, who's going to be driving things, and who will have secondary roles. And these are very important things to have in a mentoring plan. So as you define those things for your student, there's also the question of, how the PI defines their own role. So what services do you offer to the students, and what services don't you offer to the students? For example, when I'm meeting with people in my lab very early on, I tell them, one of the things I don't provide is motivation. If you're not self-motivated, I'm not going to be a cheerleader who's going to help you with that. However, if you have a technical problem in the lab or you want to work on writing, I'll be right there with you. So that's my character. That's what I'm particularly good at. Another thing that was important for me to learn, and I think for a lot of people still needing to learn, especially early in the career, is overcoming a tendency to avoid tough conversations. So if a student is, in your lab, maybe doing something like a research rotation, and you think, I don't think this student's going to, work out. And it's possible to tell that student something like, well, funding is tight, or, I'm not sure there's going to be a position on this project. But it's a lot better for everyone, except for your own discomfort, if you just tell them exactly what are their shortcomings and how they can work to address those, either continuing on in your group or in their next stage. Another big issue I've seen come up is timing of feedback. I strive to give very fast feedback to my students now, paper drafts, ideally within a day. And if you can do it, it's great. But the alternative is to at least define when the feedback will come. So if you tell students when they send you something, look, I need this thesis draft a week in advance because that's how long it's going to take me to turn it around. That idea of them sending you an email and an inquiry and it just kind of hanging out there stresses them out greatly. So communicating that is another important thing. And that's something you can define in the mentoring plan. You can tell them this is typically what I do. I would also encourage you strongly to make time to interact one-on-one with students. Mentoring of some sorts can be done in group settings, but most of it is a one-on-one event. And so you can recover quite a lot of time if you consider what it's important and what your students may be able to do for you. They can do quite a bit to ease your workload with making presentations, reviewing papers, and all these things actually build their skills quite well. The next slide, I will just quickly go through. There are just a few other things. I mean, one is this mentor-mentee relationship that when people are assistant professors, it feels like, a parasite-host relationship. Of course, everybody gets a lot out of it. The professor gets tenure and the student gets a lot of accomplishments. But this evolves and can become much more student-focused as you move to later in your career. Joint mentorship has become a big topic lately. In my experience, it's a bit of a minefield. We have actually a form to help navigate this. But even if you don't have a joint mentorship situation, mentoring networks, finding people able to give you that guidance you don't get for your PI is critical. And I think I am out of time, so I will leave that last point for you just to read.
Thank you, Ricardo and Adam. I'm going to probably repeat a few things, but I'm Ruth Varner, and I'm a professor of biogeochemistry at the University of New Hampshire. And really, my mentoring started when I was a technician and a graduate student, really more as a peer mentor. And that has really, I've gained a great deal of experience over the last 30 years, I would say, mentoring more than 20 master's and PhD students, as well as many more undergraduates. I also had the opportunity here at the University of New Hampshire to develop a program called the Mentorship Academy, and it was developed through multiple different and applied through multiple different NSF grants. And as part of that, I really learned a lot about what's in the literature around mentoring, and also learning from my colleagues and the folks that went through the Mentorship Academy. And this is sort of the definition that we have come up with for our Mentorship Academy, that mentoring is really a reciprocal relationship. So you as a mentor and your mentee get something from that relationship, and it can vary, I think, as Adam mentioned, over the course of your career. But really, it's a relationship between a more experienced person who acts as a guide, a role model, a teacher, and an advocate for a less experienced person. And I've learned a great deal about that and really implemented that through a number of programs, being a PI of the Convergence Arctic Research Perspectives in Education, NRT, where we actually do require IDPs and also revisit those yearly to work with the students to make sure they're on track, or to adjust it to what their maybe new goals are, or refinement of those goals. And also I'm a co-director of the Emerge Biological Integration Institute, where we do a lot of mentorship training. Next slide, please. And so I've just kind of come up with some mentoring strategies to share with you, and hopefully I can get through all these, but if not, I think we're sharing the slides. So I think one of the most important things is really thinking about how do you communicate with your mentees. So setting up a a clear communication plan. Can you text me? When will you hear from me? How should you get in touch with me? Emergencies versus everyday kind of things. And really thinking about a consistent meeting schedule is very important for mentees. I also think it's important to have a lab or a group set of expectations document, and one that is really something that can be edited. So it's an editable document that you go through with your lab group or with your group of students each year, so that they understand sort of the norms and a conflict resolution plan, which I think was also mentioned by Adam. It's important to understand how you resolve conflicts in your group, set goals for the research, and really discuss how mentors can support students in those goals, and then determine other supports the student might need to be successful, whether they need information on where they might receive support for finding an apartment or supporting their family, that kind of thing. I think it's also important to help foster independence. And so early on in your relationship, you're really doing a lot more of the heavy lifting, learning from each other, but really trying to get mentees to a level of independence and support their growth. So really asking mentees for their ideas of how that might look, offer leadership roles within your group, and acknowledge the growth of the mentee when you do observe it. Getting to know your mentee as a person is really important for addressing diversity. So making space for your mentee and for you to share about yourselves and your values. And also ask your mentee to describe how they would like their identities to be recognized and honored in this mentoring relationship. Sometimes that's a hard conversation to have, but if you give them the opportunity to describe how they would like that, that helps you navigate maybe a challenging conversation for yourself. It's also important that we're assessing understanding with our mentees, and so really both their science content, as a scientist, and their personal strengths. So giving them an opportunity to have some self-reflection on their strengths and areas of growth, as well as having them, explain or draw their project to you or others in the lab and give them feedback. And I think, as Adam mentioned, feedback's really important, and communicating exactly how and when they might receive feedback is important. I love that Adam can get back to people quickly. I don't always have that opportunity, and so my students know for sure that I need at least a week in anything that they provide me, and we understand that up front. And then I really, this idea of promoting professional development, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about IDPs, but I think those are really important documents as a guide, but also should be regularly revised and revisited, so that as mentees are changing their goals, or as they're learning more, you can integrate that to their IDPs. But also thinking about scheduling professional development topics into your meeting times, like thinking about developing their CV, what kind of meetings they might want to go and present their work, and also providing them opportunities for networking. And one of the most, I think, important things you're doing as a mentor is really promoting your mentees' work. So ensuring that you're advocating both for them in their needs, but also really showing them that you respect the work they've done, and that you're giving them credit for that work. Because as part of this webinar, we really want to talk about what the importance of this mentoring relationship is to our research. And so really, if you're really a research group that works together in this way, then you're really advocating for your whole group by talking about that work with others. And I think my last slide is really just some resources, and if you could, and a picture of my last 4 graduate students who graduated this spring. And it was a really great group of students who both I mentored individually, but we also did some group mentoring, which I thought was a great experience and something you all should try. So thank you. And thanks again for NSF and the Council of Graduate Schools for inviting me.
Thank you all so much. It's an impossible task for really that we have set for you as faculty who are as passionate and as creative as you are in supporting your students and finding ways to do that, to ask you to limit yourself such a short amount of time. So thank you, that was outstanding. Any of the resources that the faculty have referenced, we will make available, those ones that are on the slides as mentioned. We have Michigan is known far and wide for outstanding mentorship work, and there's some great work there on their webpage, and so that will all be available. Both Ruth and Adam mentioned you were part of committees that are looking at mentorship on your campuses and have been leaders in that regard. One of the questions was, what recommendations do you have to motivate faculty with different preferences to work on their skill set? In particular, this question was around feedback. In general, are there some structural things that have supported you within your institutions to do this kind of work that you might be able to share to encourage other faculty?
So you can get some percentage by providing the literature and the evidence that mentoring plans work, and then you can get the rest of the people by requiring them.
That's a great answer, Adam. I would agree with you. I think in our Mentorship Academy, we talk a lot about this evidence that I think Jackie mentioned early on, that, mentee success is really very dependent on the mentoring and the quality mentoring. And so some people like to see statistics and see those numbers, but I think unfortunately that sort of requirement, which is actually great, I think that NSF has added this to our proposal process, is really thinking about helping, making sure that we have help on campus for faculty to actually become better mentors and also develop their mentoring plans. But I think this requirement will help a great deal with that.
Thank you. The next question is, in my experience, mentoring students helps students to clarify their career goals. And this is something that Ricardo mentioned. Sometimes the students come into you with very limited understanding of what their career goals might be. And based on the work that they do with you and on the deep dive they do into the area, they may well change. Can you speak a little bit to how you navigate that with the students and how these mentoring plans are helpful in that regard?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mentioned that I meet with the students and postdocs early on to try to develop an individual development plan with them. But of course, they may not have very clear ideas of what they want to do yet at the beginning. And so we don't have to decide everything right away. We can leave it as time goes on. And of course, Ruth mentioned that, for instance, these plans have to be revised periodically. That could be every semester. It could be even more frequently than that. Yeah, we have to leave room to make sure that the student or the postdoc can change their mind or focus more in a different way. After all, they're learning with us too, and they may learn something different that might kick them into a different career path, and that's a possibility.
As a next step to that question, someone has particularly asked around those students and postdocs, presumably, who are interested in non-academic roles and perhaps going into industry and taking what historically would have been seen as non-traditional, however, is becoming more and more the norm for our graduate students as they move forward. Thoughts on how we make those kinds of external opportunities more visible, supported, and available to the students?
If I can say something real quick, for example, when we have seminar series in our departments or in our groups, I try to make sure that we invite people that are relevant to the goals of the people that I have in my group. So sometimes we have more academic people come around, and other times we invite people from industry or government labs.
Yeah, alumni networks are usually the kind of gold standard for getting people that are willing to commit, back, and that have gone into other careers. And I mean, we're seeing a lot of departments have alumni networks as resources for their students, and this being really successful, because the idea that, like many faculty, we went from our postdocs, into our faculty position, that we're going to be able to speak knowledgeably about, industry or, all these other things. It's, maybe not that easy for us. I'll throw one other thing in too, which is you also have to, as students talk about their interests, you also really have to watch for people that are kind of discounting ideas for maybe reasons that aren't that firm. I see a lot of people saying, well, maybe I shouldn't, I shouldn't do an academic position because, I'm not quite like you, or I don't think I have what it takes. And, it's important to not push people, but also to make sure that there are a lot of good reasons not to be an academic. But there are also a lot of reasons not, that aren't really valid. And so making sure that you have those conversations and that people don't talk themselves out of things that might be a really good match for them is important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Adam. I also think having those conversations honestly about what your job really is and sort of what makes you happy about it and excited, because I think, we can get bogged down in our daily academic lives, which can, especially when there's financial concerns, gets a little depressing, and that's what they hear. But really, being enthusiastic about the things you enjoy, if it lines up with what they're interested in. I definitely find it a little overwhelming to try to mentor students who are going to be in a career that I'm not in or have experience in. And so I like the ideas that Ricardo has mentioned about bringing in speakers and also the networking with alumni. One other way we're trying to do that with our NRT program is to offer, as part of the NRT, which is of course funding you have to get, is offer internships with industry or with partners like the USGS, for example, as part of ours. And so really trying to get folks a chance to meet with folks, networking or internships is a really great way, I think, to give them that opportunity when maybe you don't have that knowledge.
Also, organizations like SIAM, for example, includes people from outside academia, and those conferences are very useful.
Thank you all for that. We have a question around the balance and your thoughts on one-on-one mentoring versus cohort and group mentoring, mentoring networks. How have you found those different ways of approaching your role with your students?
I mean, my very personal, I find the group mentoring is hard. I mean, if you're trying to teach a skill, like I do a financial literacy seminar for 50 students at a time, that's fine. But if I wanted somebody to understand what their career options are, what their strengths are, this is a uniquely one-on-one problem. And so I tend to favor the one-on-one approach.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, Adam. I think thinking about what is it that the student needs, and is that something that you can convey to a larger group, or is it really more specific? I had, as I mentioned, those 4 master's students who finished this spring came through the program together. And so I did a lot of group work on like development of skills with respect to data analysis and coding. And then when we sort of got closer to the thesis writing and the more individual meetings were really helpful for that, and also talking about their career aspirations too.
I mentioned a little bit in my presentation that I like to make sure that my postdocs, for example, have opportunities to mentor undergraduate students, for instance. So they're learning about mentoring also, but so to some degree they can also mentor graduate students especially if they're working on something related.
Thank you. There are some more questions, but in the interest of time, I would love to just give you last parting words, and then we will move on to more of a deeper dive on the IDP.
Well, I'll start. I think that mentoring is extremely important and very helpful for minority groups that are often left out or they don't have people around them all the time that can tell them about science careers. That was my case, for example. It's really important to have mentors, and this is the kind of model that I think can be very helpful to those groups. And so I think it's very important to do this.
Yeah. And I'd say good and intentional mentoring saves you time. It doesn't cost you time, because it gets so much easier as you start to, figure out what your style is, and each student becomes less mysterious, as you've had more and more. And so it can go very quickly. Whereas when students have problems in the program, things that slow them down, this is what costs real time.
Yeah, I agree that upfront in time is really important for when there are conflicts or when issues arise. It becomes much easier to help students navigate the program. And I would say too that I wouldn't be here without very good mentoring from multiple different people. And so I think encouraging students to find mentors for different parts of their lives is really important as well. We can't be the only person who can mentor them, and we definitely can't fulfill all their needs. So
I want to thank you all so much for all of the wonderful work that you're doing and for your willingness to participate in this panel. And I'm sure that our colleagues out there, the PIs, have taken a lot from your remarks. So thank you very much for that. We are now going to turn over to the final component of our webinar this afternoon, creating and supporting high quality individual development plans. And it is my pleasure to introduce Corey Kinyoshi, and she is the Senior Portfolio Manager of Student Experiences. And sorry, that jumped right in front of my notes. So just give me 1 second. Sorry, Corey. Corey is the Portfolio Manager in Student Experiences Office at the American Chemical Society and a PI of an NSF IGE grant. And it is a great pleasure for me to introduce you to Corey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So I'm going to talk today about enhancing graduate program experience, which is, as Carrie said, really capturing the impact of the IDP process. Next slide. Many people talk about the significance and impact of individual development plan, but it is really important to know what we mean by that. What makes an IDP impactful has a lot to do with understanding what impact means. What are you trying to change? How can it be measured? Understanding the different definitions. Sometimes we talk about IDPs, other times we're talking about IDP tools or platforms. And what is the IDP process? As well as having a consistent way to measure impact and creating a holistic career development programming for STEM graduate cohorts that utilize IDPs. Next slide. So over the past 20 plus years, there has been growing visibility of the need for IDPs in graduate education. And now granting agencies such as NSF have mandated their use. Various platforms have been created. Some of you are familiar with My IDP, Chem IDP, as well as Imagine PhD. So my journey with IDPs, creating them and studying their impact, began with leading the development and launch of ACS's Chem IDP, which is an IDP platform, and later as the PI for the NSF IGE grant Impact Indicators and Instruments for IDPs. Now, this yielded a toolkit to study IDP efficacy among graduate students, which is respective of all structures of IDP use, because we're looking at the change in the development with the student. Next slide. So it seems pretty much a straightforward story if you look at it one way. There were reports and studies that show the need for IDPs and career planning. IDP platforms have been created. There's granting agencies that are setting requirements like NIH and now NSF. And now we have tools to measure impact. Next slide. But the ups and downs of the real story leaves us with two valleys to be crossed. First, the students understanding what they're doing here. And the administrators and faculty mentors understanding of how they can maximize the utility of IDPs. Next slide. In regards to individual development plans, while they are used in graduate and postdoctoral training, there is a lack of clear definitions and frameworks and evidence for the effectiveness of IDPs. Next slide. And for this reason, we had the goals for the NSF grant, Impact Indicators and Instruments for IDPs, which studies IDP efficacy. So our goals were to define the IDP and the core components of the IDP process in the context of social science studies, as well as theories that were already available, define anticipated measurable outcomes for the IDP process, and develop and test a set of instruments for demonstrating changes in students' actions and attitudes, which result from the use of IDP process, and also recommend strategies for putting this to use in practice. Next slide. So this study brought together a great number of stakeholders for us and experts from the STEM graduate education community, as well as the career development community and the psychology and education community. We also utilized previous research. An example was an NSF I-Core-L study that looked at individual development plan use that had over 125 individual interviews with faculty members, as well as graduate students. We had 5 core team members, over 15 subject matter expert consultants. 3 of these were creators of major IDP platforms, such as MyIDP, ChemIDP, and Imagine PhD. So it was a dream team collaboration. We also had 6 focus groups of subject matter experts examining core components. 31 were convened at an I3IDP summit where we looked at different types of components that were common among IDP process, and 12 universities involved in toolkit testing. Next slide. So the key insight here that we came to was that there was confusion around the term IDP, which can be clarified to cover 3 distinct things. The action plan created by the student, the tool or platform they can use to create that plan, and most importantly, and often missed, the IDP process itself, which is about self-assessment, career and contextual exploration, decision-making, and goal setting. And this is all centered around the student and their unique identity. Next slide. So this process surrounds 4 interrelated and iterative activities. Again, self-assessment, career exploration, decision-making, and goal setting, all of which are related to identity formation. Essentially focusing on who you are, what are your options, what will you decide, how will you get there, setting career and professional identity goals that are specifically right for the individual. Next slide. Our team also created a toolkit, a series of validated indicators that schools and programs can utilize to quantify the impact of IDP program implementation and compare data across fields and locations. So I'm just going to cover a few of them on the right side, which focuses on when students engage in the IDP process, their faculty research advisors will be better positioned to support the development of mentoring relationships, have students who complete their degree in a shorter period of time, and be better positioned to provide feedback on students' progress to degree or academic advancement. Next slide. The key idea is that we have to move from a checkbox form that students see as a hoop that they need to jump through to a lifelong process where students can, along with help from their mentors, take ownership or agency of their own career. So on the left-hand side, you find the things that we found from this study that were not so useful, which include a checkbox process for conducting IDPs, having students fill out an IDP tool without guidance, for example, sending them the link to a website, not measuring impact and not knowing what you want to impact, and having unrealistic expectations in an attempt to scale for large numbers. And most importantly, no focus on mentorship. Whereas what we found was very useful was using IDP process as an umbrella offering that encompasses all your career and professional development program. Mentorship, DEIR, self-awareness modules, etc. Scale by using the cohort model, couple with mentorship. An example is having meetings with your graduate student every 6 months, focusing on the journey and transitions and measuring outcomes. Next slide. So here's a quick snapshot sketch about what the IDP process is about. It is about the student's individual journey, which can be compared to the hero's journey, which is focused on transitions, growth, hardship, failures, followed by learning, and coupled with mentor guidance, periods of rebirth, or if you'd rather, simply getting help on moving to the next phase in your career and life. And as you've heard the previous speakers say, the focus for the individual development plan is on individuality. Next slide. So in conclusion, with proper action, institutions, departments, and individual faculty can implement the model of the IDP process so they can mentor their students towards more meaningful career paths and create useful metrics to measure their impact. So for focus, the recommendation is focusing on mentoring, metrics, and meaning to the IDP process. And last slide is next. The I3 IDP user guide is available at the website link that I'm offering, and I would love to talk to people about this. Part of my job at ACS is to also create programs for undergrads through graduate students that facilitates the IDP process and also does evaluation on them, and also looks at identity formation utilizing the 4 components. Thank you to CGS and NSF for the invite.
Thank you so much, Corey, and again to our PIs for your insights and to our colleagues from NSF for being here. We are, as we've been saying all along, we're monitoring the chats. There are some additional questions coming in. For example, there was one about the NSF GRFP. We did speak to that at the beginning of the session. We will go back and also put the answers to these particular questions into the FAQ that we are constructing, and we will hopefully answer all of your questions in that way. So thank you to everyone who are participating and posting some fantastic questions. I'm looking for, at this point, if we have particular questions for Corey with regard to the IDP and the research that has been done. So Corey, just to reiterate again, individuality and specificity of purpose seem to really have come out as really important components of what makes the IDP effective.
Yes, definitely. And including when you're looking at the 4 components, it's important. The decision-making component, for example, has a lot to do with individuality, as does the goal setting, and that the student is actually utilizing their attributes, not just to point them to the right career, but also to set goals that make sense for them in the mechanisms that they're used to using.
We have a question here, and that is, have other societies reached out to get support from your organization, given your leadership in this regard?
So we have had partnership with the Graduate Career Consortium, which has been very helpful partnership. They have a huge cadre of career center experts and program directors. And so that has been very helpful to navigating things. Also, we had in this endeavor, we had help from AAAS as well, as they're the owners of the My IDP, as well as the authors of My IDP were one of the co-PIs for this grant.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to take an opportunity to give a shout out to Dr. Jovana Milosavljevic-Ardelian, who is my colleague, former colleague at the University of New Hampshire, who has been working with me on collecting of the resources for this project and also is actively involved in the GCC, the Graduate Career Consortium organization, which may be new to some of our attendees. It's an organization that has a lot of resources. And again, we will be linking to some of this work so that we'll bring all of this together for everyone. Question here is whether you would suggest discussion of IDPs at thesis advisory committee meetings.
So one of the pieces of advice from faculty members often is to keep some of the discussions of academic advancement separate from career choice. So even though you will have the same faculty member mentoring in both career and the academic advancement, to keep those discussions separate so that because the goal could be less, the goal should be targeted specifically. In one sense, you're talking directly to a person about what they want for their career, which could be very different than what is happening in the laboratory space.
Thank you. And I think that this will be our last question for Corey. Are there IDP tools / platforms that show better impact than others? Has anyone done that meta-analysis? Well, I think you've been so instrumental in that. Yeah.
That is a great question. So what I would say to that is that the real impact is going to come from the student going through the IDP process, which can happen with a variety of different IDP platforms. The IDP platform itself should be a secondary thing that you're offering to the students, that your mentorship should be the primary thing. That is the thing that is going to be most impactful, as well as the interventions that are part of it.
Thank you so much. Now I'm honored to turn over the floor to Suzanne Ortega. And again, thank you for the questions. They have been fantastic. And we are going to collect the chat and summarize those into a set of FAQs that will go alongside our resources, which will be available to everybody. Over to Director Suzanne Ortega.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Carrie. And let me give multiple thanks. Thanks to NSF for a thoughtful discussion of the mechanics of the new requirements, but also the philosophy that underlies it. Thanks to our presenters who modeled the fact that excellence in research is dependent on excellence in mentoring and the kind of healthy research climate that creates. Thanks to Corey for a discussion of one tool that is really helpful in moving us forward. And thanks to all of you in the audience. As Carrie mentioned, we will be preparing an FAQ. We're really interested in responding again to the logistics questions. Does summer session count as a semester in terms of substantial support? What happens if a student is working in a lab that is funded by NSF, but the student, him or herself, is not funded by NSF? What about GRFPs? And I think there were a lot of questions about that. So more to follow. I guess what I think is at the crux of this matter is how do we think about the intersection of mentoring, one-page mentoring plans, which establish a framework, a general approach to mentoring, and the requirement that mentoring really be individualized. And so it is that question of how we think carefully about the articulation between mentoring plans and tools such as IDP, which are tangible ways of mapping a path forward. So I know that, Sarah, you're going to say a few more words about when to expect recordings and other information. So I will close again with a thank you to my CGS colleagues, to all of the attendees, and to our presenters.
Thank you for that, Suzanne. So yes, I do want to end with talking about a couple of resources. Actually, Carrie, would you prefer, Carrie, would you prefer to talk about the mentoring toolkit before I talk about some of the workshop?
The mentoring resources are linked off of the CGS website. We will be sending those around, I believe, and those should be available right now. They are going to be a work in progress. And so we look forward to getting additional resources. We'll obviously confirm that the resources that were shared today will be included. And we welcome, if you feel like your university has a fantastic program, we would like to highlight those for our colleagues so that we're able to benefit from each other's wisdom here. Again, the goal is to support better research and better mentorship across the board. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. So at this time, that does conclude our programming for today, but I want to invite all of you to, if you have not already, register for our summer workshop and New Dean's Institute, which will be held in Boston, Massachusetts this year. So we would love to see you there and continue that conversation. And as Suzanne and Carrie have said, this is being recorded, so we will be sending this out to all the participants. So if you've missed something when I was showing for the beginning, didn't take past up notes, we've got you. Send out the recording and the slides in the next few days. Thank you so very much for attending. Thank you to all of our presenters, and have a wonderful rest of your day.